What's going on, Internet? This week is all about nuclear. So we're talking about nuclear energy and its role in our future when transitioning to a 100% carbon-free world. So this week's topic is kind of an extension of a recent path that I've been going on, which is kind of is climate change and all that stuff within climate change. And one of the discussions around climate change and how we get to a world that's being able to combat that is an energy source that is actually coming from nuclear, or it's a combination of nuclear and other renewables. So, interestingly enough, I was thinking about this whole concept and this topic, and while researching it, and I realized that my perception of nuclear is actually different than most, because I actually grew up next to a nuclear power plant. The entire city was run on that and a few other energy sources. So it's interesting to think that when most people have this idea of radiation and nuclear and things like that, they tend to have these sense and these fears of radiation being spread out everywhere, or nuclear bombs and things like that. So just an interesting idea or thought I had, that your childhood shapes so much of your perception and the way that you see the world based off of what you're just surrounded by and what you consume. So why nuclear? Why are we discussing this? Well, in the space of climate change, nuclear has kind of had a revamp of interest due to the fact that there's most likely we're going to need it to actually get to where we need to be by the time we've set for ourselves, thanks to the IPCC and all the research they've done on what needs to be done for us to lower our emissions. And the reason that is because nuclear is known as kind of like a baseload energy source, and baseload meaning that it can be used whenever it's needed. But when you look at the renewables, most of them only work when the environment plays nice with them. So if the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing, solar power and turbines are almost useless. And that goes back to the battery storage concept we've researched as well, is we need batteries that can store the energy so we can use it for later. But this week we're going to discuss nuclear, what it is, where it came from. If you're interested, go look at the post. I'll show a little screenshot here of what it is. We talk a lot about kind of the history of nuclear, the perceptions of it, why a lot of the myths around the safety of nuclear are actually false and misguided. Talk about some future generations of nuclear reactors and what this all means for us. So here I'm going to talk about a few things, not everything in the post, but a few things I think are quite interesting that I came across. And the first one we'll talk about is the perception, the public's perspective and perception of nuclear power. So when there was a survey done, and I'll show a chart here, and it's basically 60% of the planet is against nuclear being used for an energy source. And there are many reasons for that, but the majority of those are around safety and concerns of nuclear meltdowns within a nuclear power plant exploding, like Fukushima or Chernobyl or 3 Mile Island. And the interesting thing about this is that safety is a concern, but it's not as much as a concern as people make it out to be. So I'm going to show you another chart here, and what they've done is they've basically compared all the different energy sources together on the death rate of how many deaths per, I think it's kilowatt hour or something like that, in relation to the energy source. And you can obviously see that coal and oil and all that stuff are extremely high on this chart, but if you go all the way down to the bottom, you'll see that nuclear is almost the safest, and in comparison to biofuel, I think, is first. And when you think about this, when you compare that to air pollution, because air pollution is the biggest cause for a lot of the deaths happening today, and I think it's like 5 million deaths per year due to air pollution. And by using nuclear energy, you're actually saving a lot of lives, because you're pulling a lot of that carbon, or that future carbon, out of the air, and that air pollution out of the air to save them through this kind of other alternative. But the interesting thing is, we humans like to tell stories, and we're entertained by scary things sometimes. And this misconception and misguided perception of nuclear energy has actually impacted the way that plants are being created today and the amount that are being created today. So it's a knock-on effect of if the public is against it, then politicians are against it, and if the politicians are against it, that means there's going to be more regulations. If there's more regulations, that means it's going to cost more, and it's going to take more time to actually create, design, and build power plants in countries that don't support it. And in the U.S., we've actually increased the cost to create a plant and the time to create a plant have actually increased over history, which is a phenomenon to me, because when I look at most industries and I look at most technologies, everything usually is up and to the right for speed and down into the right for cost. Usually things are going down in cost and increasing, we can move faster. And here's a chart that I came across that actually shows the leveling off of plants being created. So it kind of tails off near today. And it's interesting to see that increase in power plants has actually died off due to the fact that this misconception from the public has actually impacted the amount that we're actually creating and investing into the R&D and creation of these plants. So enough about the misconceptions. There's a lot more out there. I would definitely recommend you go see. There's a TED Talk. I'll show 2 seconds of it here.
It was a really terrible accident. And when they start counting bodies, what they come up with is 28 deaths from acute radiation syndrome, 15 deaths over the last 25 years from thyroid cancer,
where basically this individual talks about a lot of the misconceptions around the 3 biggest accidents that have happened: Chernobyl, Fukushima, and 3 Mile Island. And they do an analysis of all the research that has been done by international bodies, basically seeing all the deaths related to these accidents and what these deaths were correlated to, and if there were any correlated to actual radiation. But now I want to talk a bit about a report that I came across that MIT put together. It's a massive report. It's like 200 and something pages. I'm not going to bore you with this report, but there are a few takeaways that I think would be relevant to share here. And the gist of the report is basically, how do we take nuclear and scale it up in a way that is useful for us in the future? And what are some of the hurdles we're going to have to get past to do so? So there are a few things here I've listed out. I'm not going to tell you all of them because there's too many, but I'll list out a few that are interesting that popped out to me. So what we're doing a lot in the nuclear space, in the nuclear world, is we're reinventing the wheel a lot when it comes to both best practices for project management and also the actual design and creation of plants. So what they're saying in this report is that it's important for people to share their lessons learned and create more, concise and succinct processes for project management and actually getting things together, because in the nuclear space, there tends to be a trend of going over budget and over time when it comes to creating plants. And for the creation of plants, there's another reason for that, is that they're actually customizing each plant to each location, which maybe there should be some customization based off of geography and population and government regulations and things like that. But there's a push in this report where they're basically saying we should do cookie cutter plants like France, where we basically take a plant, we run it through a really well-defined supply chain, and then out pops different reactors, and we just kind of keep pushing them out as if it were a factory run kind of plant situation. Another one is actually implementing new generations of plants. So I'll show a little chart here where basically different nuclear plants, they've evolved over time. So there's generation 1, 2, 3, and 4. Most of the plants that we use today are generation 2. There's some live generation 3 plants, and then there's generation 4 plants being prototyped, designed, and rolled out in the 2030s, being worked on today. And each of these plants in the evolution, they become more effective, more efficient, and also, the most importantly, more safe. And they talk about how it's important that we actually start pumping these generation 3 plants out a lot faster. So that's another interesting point. Another one that I came across, which is interesting, is that basically every highly regulated industry, coming from a guy that's worked in banking and finance and payments, they tend to have these things called sandboxes, which are like playgrounds for the companies. And these regulated sandboxes are where companies come and they prototype and they innovate and they usually test and they try to commercialize different products, getting licenses through the government. And this is something that apparently the nuclear industry has, or actually I don't think it actually has this, so it's something that they should get. And by getting that, it actually increases both the innovation in the space, but also increases the speed to market. And lastly is funding and fair playing fields. So they're stating here in the report that there needs to be more funding around sharing costs for certain things, but also the other thing is having a fair playing field. We're putting carbon taxes on heavy fossil fuel industries. So carbon tax is something that many people discuss, but there's not much progress being made, at least that I've seen. And so I want to finish this video and finish the post with basically kind of a conclusion and a point that I came across, or that I came to after doing this research, both in renewables and storage and in nuclear, is that there's almost an ideological debate between how we get to 100% carbon-free world. And to get there, there's basically 2 paths. There's one path that's 100% renewables and improved storage. So we basically take solar, wind, hydro, and all that stuff and take that all the way to, 100% decarbonized world. And then there's another path, which is basically taking renewables and a bit of nuclear and getting there that way. And there's actually a debate that I listened to from Intelligence Squared, which is quite good. And the point that I walked away with this is that there is no, it's not and, it's or no, it's not or, it's and. So instead of saying we should do this or this, it's both. We should basically be throwing everything we can at this problem because it's a massive problem. We have zero time. In previous posts, I think I've shared that we have actually run out of time. And the thing is, we should be throwing both nuclear and renewables and all of our resources at this as much as possible to actually solve this problem, because it's a big, hard problem. And the way I see it is by debating, it's needed, but to a certain extent, right? There's diminishing return. So if we debate too long, we're just shooting ourselves in the foot further and further and further. So what needs to happen is there needs to be more action taken more immediately. So yeah, this was this week's post. I did a lot of research on nuclear. It was fun. It was enjoyable. And I will see you next week, Internet.